"But, Your Honor," objected the lawyer, "he was representing the husband, John Elliott, in this divorce case." "Never mind, counsel," replied Judge Lowell. "Your objection is overruled. You may raise another objection, present evidence, or sit down." Bill Simpson glanced at his client, shrugged, and sat down. Mrs. Elliott's lawyer, Dennis Johnson, stood up. "Your Honor, we would like to present—" "Sit down, Mr. Johnson. I believe I have all the information I need." Judge Lowell looked at his notes. "Let's summarize and get on with the case. Mrs. Elliott filed for divorce, and Mr. Elliott filed a counterclaim." He flipped through a few pages in his notebook. "It appears that Mr. Elliott and a certain Miss Jane Taylor were involved in a sexual relationship. Mrs. Elliott, through her lawyer, has submitted photographs, video, and audio recordings as evidence. Miss Taylor has also testified that she and Mr. Elliott were, shall we say, a couple. Is that clear?" he asked. It was more of a rhetorical question than a real one. "Yes, Your Honor," replied Mr. Johnson. "It was provocation, Your Honor," Mr. Simpson objected. "My client was away on a business trip for a conference. He was alone, missing his wife, and had a few too many drinks. Miss Taylor met my client at the hotel bar and seduced him." Simpson paused dramatically. "Mr. Elliott admits his mistake, apologized, and tried to explain to his wife that it was a one-time mistake." "That's correct, Mr. Simpson," said Lowell. The lawyer began to smile, and the judge continued. "As I understand it, that is correct. However, the provocation occurred after Mr. Elliott told Miss Taylor that he would not leave his wife as he had promised her." He nodded to Mr. Johnson. Johnson stood up and placed another large envelope on the bench in front of the judge. "This additional report from a private investigator was compiled 5 weeks before the incident at the business conference," Johnson said. "It will prove that this was a long-term affair, not a one-time incident, as Mr. Elliott claims." "That removes the charge of provocation, doesn't it?" asked Lowell. He smiled maliciously at Simpson and his client. Looking directly at the plaintiff, the judge said, "Mr. Elliott, you have broken your marriage vows. You have broken your marriage contract, and you have broken your wife's heart. You will pay for that, sir." Lowell leaned forward and took the proposed property settlement agreement. "Do you agree to this agreement, Mrs. Elliott?" "Well, I don't have much choice, sir." "Why not, Mrs. Elliott?" Lowell asked. She hesitated, cleared her throat, and hesitated again. "Let me guess, Mrs. Elliott. Your husband told you that if you didn't agree, he would drag the divorce out indefinitely and you wouldn't be able to pay a year or more in court costs." Mrs. Elliott looked at her lawyer. He tried to hide a smile, nodded to her, and nudged her to answer. "Yes, Your Honor," Mrs. Elliott replied. "That's almost exactly what John told me." "I thought so," Lowell said, more to himself than to her. Turning to Elliott and Simpson, Lowell ordered, "Please stand, gentlemen. I will now announce my decision. Listen carefully, Mr. Elliott." He paused for a few seconds. "Mr. Elliott, you will continue to pay for the house you lived in with your wife until she decides to move out. When and if she moves out, the house will be sold and the proceeds divided equally. Or if you wish to keep the house, you may pay her half of its market value." Elliott blushed and looked at his lawyer. Simpson put his hand on his client's shoulder and shook his head. "In addition, you will continue to pay Mrs. Elliott's rent, insurance, and maintenance on her 2009 Mercedes ML 350, if I'm not mistaken," Judge Lowell ordered. "The lease expires in 3 years. By that time, Mrs. Elliott will have to find another means of transportation." Elliott's face darkened, and he sat down again. Simpson paled slightly but remained standing. "Your savings, checking accounts, money market accounts, and other investments will be divided equally between you and your wife, Mr. Elliott. And Mr. Elliott, don't try to empty those accounts. I froze them this morning." Lowell smiled grimly and added, "We wouldn't want anything mysterious happening to that money, would we?" Elliott sank into his chair. He looked like a broken man. "Mrs. Elliott, I understand from Mr. Elliot that he is demanding the return of the engagement ring. He said it belonged to his grandmother. You must return the ring to him. Turning, Lowell said, "And one last thing, Mr. Elliot. You will pay Mrs. Elliot alimony of $5,000 a month for 10 years, or until she remarries. You will also pay Mrs. Elliot's attorney's fees and court costs. Do you have any questions, gentlemen?" John Elliot stood up and glared at the judge. He was a confident, arrogant man, and no one had ever treated him the way Lowell had. Before he could say anything, his lawyer whispered in his ear, "After the division of property, you'll still have almost $1 million, Simpson whispered. "Don't anger this judge. He'll take everything else you have." Elliot looked at his lawyer, then at Lowell. He nodded and said sarcastically, "No, sir, no questions. I understand." "Don't be insolent, Mr. Elliot," Lowell warned. "You are the one who broke your oath to your family, your friends, and God. You are the one who is guilty here. Mr. Simpson, I expect the signed property settlement agreement I left on my desk by the end of the day tomorrow." Turning to the court reporter, he asked, "Betty, please type up the transcript of this hearing and send a copy to Mr. Simpson's office this afternoon. Add the cost of courier delivery to Mr. Elliot's court costs." "All right, court is adjourned." Johnson and Mrs. Elliot smiled at Judge Lowell. "Thank you, sir," said Mrs. Elliot. "You're welcome, Mrs. Elliot. Mr. Johnson, let me know if you have any problems getting the property division order." "All rise," ordered the bailiff as Lowell left the courtroom. "Jesus Christ," Elliot complained. "Lowell was brutal." "I told you we'd have problems when I saw he was presiding over this case," Simpson replied. "We didn't stand a chance when that report landed on his desk. If this had been the only time, as you claimed, you would have suffered, but not as much. Admit it, John. You screwed up badly, and now you're going to pay for it." Judge Randall Talbert Lowell entered his office. He took off his judge's robe and hung it on a wooden hanger. Almost falling into his chair, he ran his hand over his face. "Maybe it's time for me to retire," he thought. "I could go back to practicing law or teaching. There must be some way out." Randall was too young to retire. He was only 52. His once dark hair was streaked with gray. His neatly trimmed beard and mustache were gray. At 5 feet 10 inches and 175 pounds, he weighed less than when he graduated from college. This was the result of his wife, to whom he had been married for 28 years, putting him on a healthy diet and making him exercise. The bailiff entered the judge's chambers. "Are you all right, Your Honor?" he asked with concern in his voice. He had noticed Lowell's sad, tired look as he left the courtroom. "Yes, Percy, I just feel sorry for myself," Lowell replied. Percy Jacobs was over 6 feet tall and very large. At first glance, he looked fat, but if you bumped into him, you quickly changed your mind. He was as solid as a granite boulder. Everyone called him PJ, except Lowell. No one else was close enough or brave enough to call this big man Percy. "Mrs. Elliot was very happy," Percy said with a broad smile, trying to cheer up the judge. "She came in thinking she would get nothing. Instead, her husband got what he deserved, and she got everything. I thought Mr. Elliot was going to have a heart attack." Percy grinned, and when Lowell smiled back, his laughter turned into loud laughter. "What's bothering you, Judge? I think you did a good job today." "I thought that when I became a judge on the Arizona Supreme Court, I would preside over criminal cases or major trials. Instead, all I get are divorce cases." Lowell sighed, then smiled slightly at Percy. "I wanted to change the world for the better. I wanted to do something useful." "Judge, you are changing the world for the better, and I believe that preserving families and protecting people is a worthy cause," Percy said. "Of course, I'm just a bailiff, but that's my opinion." He looked at Lowell for a few seconds. "Last week, I was in the lawyer's room and overheard two of them talking. One said that if he saw you were the judge in his case and his client had cheated on his wife, he would advise them to reconcile. He said the cheater didn't stand a chance if you were the judge." Percy laughed and asked, "Do you know what they call you?" Lowell shook his head. "They call you the hanging judge," Percy said with a broad smile. "They say you hang unfaithful spouses. They say that if you could give them prison time, you'd lock them up and throw away the key." Lowell couldn't help smiling at Percy's words. "I suppose I do judge spouses who cheat on each other too harshly. But what can you do? They deserve it. All right, Percy, you've done your job. I'll be here tomorrow, ready to work." He stood up and touched Percy's shoulder. "Thank you," he said. Percy smiled, nodded, and left the office. Randall Lowell sincerely disliked unfaithful spouses. His own son, Robert, had cheated on his wife, Sandy, many times until she finally couldn't take it anymore and filed for divorce. Sandy moved across the country to live with her parents, taking their 2 children with her. Lowell and his wife Mary helped raise the children while Robert worked, and Sandy returned to college to finish her education. Now they rarely saw their grandchildren and only spoke to them once a month. It hurt Lowell that he couldn't see them grow up and be a part of their lives. Robert left town shortly after Sandy moved away. Lowell and his wife hadn't seen their son in almost 3 years. Randall and Mary discussed several times what they had done wrong in raising their son, but they never found the answer. "All rise," Percy said loudly. "The Honorable Randall T. Lowell will preside." After Lowell sat down at the table, Percy said, "You may be seated." Bill Simpson and his client, Mr. Jerry Williams, sat at one table, while Thomas Schilling and his client, Mrs. Marcy Williams, sat at the other. Lowell listened to the accusations and counter-arguments of both sides for several minutes. In his opinion, Schilling had made a tactical mistake by calling Mrs. Williams as a witness. "I will repeat the question, Mrs. Williams. Do you deny that you had or have a sexual relationship?" Schilling asked. "Yes, I do. I love my husband, but he believes the rumors and gossip spread by people who don't like me," she replied. "They are trying to destroy our marriage because they are jealous of our happiness." Lowell looked through his notes, documents, and evidence presented by the lawyers. "Excuse me, Mr. Schilling," he said. Turning to Mrs. Williams, he asked, "Do you know what the penalty is for perjury, Mrs. Williams?" She looked at her lawyer in confusion. "Your Honor, I object to that question, sir," Schilling said. "It's a simple question, counsel." Turning to Mrs. Williams, he said, "If you lie under oath in this court, you could be punished, even sent to prison. How long depends on how angry I get. Now, do you wish to change any part of your testimony?" "Of course not," Mrs. Williams replied, not letting her lawyer stop her. "I told the truth." "Do you know Jeremy Stewart, Mrs. Williams?" Lowell noticed the shocked expression on the woman's face. "You may leave, Mrs. Williams," Lowell ordered. "But, Your Honor, I haven't finished my questions," Schilling said. "Yes, you are, Mr. Schilling. Mr. Simpson, call your witness, please," Lowell ordered. "Let's get this farce over with." "The plaintiff calls Mr. Jeremy Stewart to the witness stand, Your Honor." Mrs. Williams's face almost turned pale as the witness made his way to the witness stand. She quickly whispered to her lawyer. "I told you not to lie about the affair in court," Schilling whispered back. "I tried to warn you about Judge Lowell, but you wouldn't listen. Now you understand what I was talking about." Jeremy Stewart testified that he and Mrs. Williams had been having an affair for 6 months, until a month ago. He said they met once a week when Mrs. Williams was supposed to go out with friends after work. Stewart also said that he stayed at her house when her husband was away on business. He provided several photographs he had taken at various times. The more Stewart spoke, the lower Mrs. Williams sank in her chair. "Would you like to see the photos? Present them as evidence?" Simpson asked Mrs. Williams. Both shook their heads. "Your witness," Simpson said, and sat down with a smile on his face. Schilling sighed and replied, "No questions, Your Honor." "Jerry, it didn't mean anything. I love you." "You left and I was weak and lonely," Mrs. Williams protested. looking at the table where her husband was sitting. "For God's sake, Marcy," Jerry replied. "I'm only going away for one night. How can you feel lonely in one night?" "Silence in the courtroom," Lowell ordered and banged his gavel. "Let's get this mess over with, shall we?" Lowell finally looked up and leafed through his notes again. "I rule in favor of the plaintiff and grant Mr. Williams a divorce on the grounds of irreconcilable differences. Personally, I would have cited adultery as the reason for the divorce, but you are better judge of that than I am." He nodded to Williams. "This property division is a joke," Lowell said, tearing the document in half. "Mr. Williams gets the house and the furniture. After all, he worked and paid for everything. He can decide whether to live there or sell the house. If you sell it, you will have to give 30% of the proceeds to your ex-wife. You both earn about the same, so there will be no alimony. Mr. Williams gets the savings, checking, and all investment accounts." Lowell looked at Mrs. Williams's reaction and smiled to himself. "Unfortunately, I can't release you from all your obligations, Mr. Williams. You will have to pay Mrs. Williams $1,000 for each year of marriage, which comes to $5,000. You have 6 months to make this payment, sir." Turning to Mrs. Williams, Lowell asked, "You remember I asked you about perjury, Mrs. Williams? I should have sentenced you to several months in our county jail." He paused for a few seconds. "But I don't want the people of this town spending their tax dollars on someone like you. You are free to go. Court is adjourned." "Mr. Williams, may I have a word with you?" Lowell said. Williams approached the bench. "This is not a judge's offer, but the advice of another man. You have no place in this house. Return it to the bank and get rid of him. Unless, of course, you want to live there. It's just advice, son." "No, I never wanted that ugly thing," Williams replied. "Only Marcy and I lived in that 6-bedroom house. My wife just wanted to keep up with her friends. So we bought it, and I've regretted it ever since." Williams smiled. "Now I can get rid of it. Thanks, Judge Lowell." Lowell nodded and, as he left the courtroom, heard Schilling say to Mrs. Williams, "I tried to warn you about the hanging judge." Randall must have looked particularly pensive, serious, or depressed when he returned home. His wife greeted him when he joined her in the kitchen with the only drink he allowed himself each day. "Hi, Tally. How was your day?" Mary asked, teasing him. Tally was a nickname based on his middle name, Talbert, which he hated. Mary sometimes used it when he got too serious. Randall smiled. He knew what Mary was trying to do and couldn't resist responding. "Another day, another divorce due to infidelity. Doesn't anyone honor their marriage vows anymore?" He smiled and asked, "Do you know what they call lawyers?" "Hanging judge, right?" Mary asked. Seeing his surprised look, she added, "Percy told me when I came over for lunch last time. He said most of them are afraid of ending up with you." "What a terrible reputation," Randall said. "I wouldn't mind that nickname if I practiced criminal law." "Well, drink up, and if you're a good boy, you can smoke a cigar after dinner and then have dessert if you want," Mary said with a certain expression on her face, and kissed him. "Now go wash up. Dinner is almost ready. Julie Thomas v. James Thomas, divorce. Mr. Thomas has filed a counterclaim for divorce. Come out and hear yourselves," Percy announced. The young woman and her lawyer sat to Lowell's left, the young man and his representative to his right. Lowell read a few pre-trial notes, keeping the four waiting. "Your Honor, I am Theodore Stamos, representing the plaintiff, Mrs. Julie Thomas." "Just a moment, young man. I'll let you know when you can speak," Lowell replied. Stamos sat down, embarrassed by Lowell's rebuke. The other lawyer, Sam Collins, smiled, but said nothing. He had been in Judge Lowell's court before. Collins knew that with this judge, it was not worth trying to show off or engage in legal maneuvering. Finally, Lowell looked up. "Counsel, sit down and be quiet. I will speak and ask questions of Mr. and Mrs. Thomas, and I don't want you to interfere. I really should recuse myself from this case, but I'm not going to do that." He noticed the puzzled expressions on the faces of the young people. This means that I must recuse myself and not preside over your case for personal reasons that could lead to a conflict of interest, Lowell explained. I know people in both of your families, and some would say that I cannot or will not render a fair decision. I'm going to ask you both a few questions. When I'm done, if either of you feels that I have been unfair, I will see to it that your case is heard by another judge. Looking at the two lawyers, he added, This also applies to you, Mr. Stamos and Mr. Collins. If you believe I have overstepped my authority, you may request a different judge. Is that clear? The two lawyers replied, Yes, Your Honor. The Thomases just nodded. Mr. and Mrs. Thomas, please come to the bench, Lowell asked. The two young people did as he asked. I'm not going to swear you in, Lowell said, but please tell the truth. If you lie, we won't get anywhere, okay? They both nodded, surprised by the informal nature of their divorce hearing. May I call you by your first names? They both nodded. How old are you? Lowell asked. He knew this from the documents, but he wanted the young couple to feel more at ease. I'm 25, James replied. I'm 23, Julie replied. How long have you been married? Next month will be 3 years, Julie replied. Good. Now, Julie, why did you file for divorce? Without waiting for an answer, Lowell looked at James. Please don't interrupt James. You can speak when Julie is finished. I promise. Well, Julie began, James called me and said he had a business dinner and would be home very late. My friend saw him getting into an elevator at the Hyatt with a blonde woman. He was holding her hand, and they were laughing and smiling. And when the credit card bill came the next month, there was a charge for a room at the Hyatt for that same night, and... Okay, that's enough for today, Julie, Lowell interrupted her. He could see she was starting to get angry again. If his plan was going to work, they both had to be in a logical state of mind. Is that your friend sitting in the front row, Julie? Yes, that's Sally, Julie replied. Sally, please stand up, Lowell asked. She stood up and Lowell said, The same rules apply to you. I'm not going to ask you to swear, but please tell the truth. Sally nodded. Can you tell me what you saw that evening? I was in the lobby of the Hyatt with some colleagues, Sally said. I was about to leave when I saw James with an older blonde woman waiting for the elevator. When the doors opened, he took her by the arm, and they got into the elevator. They were smiling, and before the doors closed, I saw James laugh. I see. Did James hug the woman or press himself against her? Did he kiss her or show any other signs of affection? No, sir, but they were smiling at something the woman said, and he took her by the elbow, Sally replied. Thank you, Sally. You may take a seat. Turning to James, he said, Okay, James, now it's your turn. I came home that evening when the credit card statement arrived in the mail, and Julie started yelling at me. She waved the statement in my face and accused me of sleeping with someone. I didn't understand what she was talking about and tried to get her to explain, but she was so angry that she wouldn't listen to me. After about 20 minutes, I couldn't take it anymore and left. She wouldn't even let me... Where did you go, James? Lowell asked, trying to calm the young man down. I drove around town and then got a room in a motel. I wanted to go home, but I didn't want to hear Julie screaming again. When did you talk to her again? Lowell asked. Well, I called her at work the next day around lunchtime. I thought we could meet and talk, James replied. But she yelled at me again and then started crying. So I stayed at the motel for a couple of days. I called her to tell her where I was staying. And what did she say? I never got to talk to her. Her friend Sally said Julie didn't want to see me or talk to me. James sighed deeply. The next week I tried calling her a few more times, but no luck. Then the divorce papers were delivered to my workplace. Lowell turned to Julie. Why did you file for divorce without talking to your husband? I'm not judging you. I just want to know the facts. Sally and some of my other friends told me I should file for divorce, Julie replied. They said it would scare him, make him confess, and he would never do anything like that again. They said then we could move on with our lives. And how did that work out? Judge Lowell asked. At the same time, he frowned at Julie's friend. Sally lowered her head, blushing at Lowell's silent reproach. Nothing worked, Julie replied, and tears filled her eyes. I called James to meet and discuss our problems, but he refused to talk to me. His secretary said she wasn't allowed to transfer my calls. Julie was already crying. She sobbed several times and added, "And then I was handed the divorce papers, too." Why did you file for divorce, James? Lowell asked. You said you just wanted to talk to Julie to explain what happened that night at the Hyatt. Why didn't you answer Julie's calls? Some friends at work told me I should file for divorce, too, to protect myself. James took another deep breath and exhaled loudly. I was very angry that Julie wouldn't let me explain. Damn it, I was angry because she even accused me of cheating. He turned to Julie. You should know that I love you too much to do that. Please talk to me, James, Lowell pleaded. Explain to me what happened at the Hyatt and who that blonde woman is. That's Mrs. Tanner. I had dinner with her and her husband, Bill. We were discussing a big project my company is doing for them. They decided to come at the last minute and asked me to book a room for them. They reimbursed me for the expense on my credit card. Despite Lowell's instructions, James looked and spoke directly to Julie. What about the smiles, the laughter, the fact that you took her arm and walked her to the elevator? The judge asked. Mr. Tanner went to their room to get a folder for me, but he couldn't find it, James said. He called Mrs. Tanner and asked her to come up and find it for him. James turned to Julie. We laughed because she said he couldn't find his head if it wasn't attached to his body. I took her by the elbow when we got into the elevator. It's just a gentlemanly gesture toward a lady. Julie took the handkerchiefs and tried to wipe her eyes. Why didn't you tell me about this before, James? Oh, I'm sorry, Your Honor. Would you ask him why he didn't tell me? Lowell smiled at his young wife. James? You didn't? I'm sorry, he said, turning to Lowell. She wouldn't let me, Your Honor. Every time I tried to say something, she just yelled louder. She told me to shut up when I tried to talk. Then she wouldn't take my calls or answer my messages. James lowered his head. When I got the divorce papers, I think I lost my mind. I filed a counterclaim and then I refused to talk to her. Lowell nodded and leaned back in his chair. You may return to your seats, he said to the young people. He waited until they had returned to their lawyers. Do either of the attorneys believe that I have been unfair or biased toward either party? Lowell asked. Both attorneys shook their heads. Julie and James, do you feel that I have given you an opportunity to be heard? Julie and James nodded. Good, Lowell said. I suppose I should explain to all of you why I conducted this hearing in this manner. Everyone, including Sally, who was sitting in the front row, nodded. A few weeks ago, I received an invitation to play golf with two old friends. I've known these men for over 30 years, since college to be exact. One is the head of the Criminal Investigation Department of our police department, your Uncle Bob, Julie. The other is the president of our Chamber of Commerce, your father, James. Both young men were more than surprised that Judge Lowell knew their relatives, let alone considered them good friends. As much as I'd like to beat them at golf, the real reason I invited you here is to talk about the two of you and your divorce, Lowell said. They're both worried about you. They said you're both stubborn, do things your own way, and have anger issues. Lowell looked straight at Julie, then at James. After listening to both of you today, I'm inclined to believe your families are right. I know it's easy to be wise in hindsight, but Julie, you should have at least asked James instead of lashing out at him. You should also have remained calm and listened to what he had to say. He turned to James. And you, young man, should have kept trying to explain to your wife. You let your anger and pride get in the way. If I were you, I would have sat at Julie's door until she stepped over me or listened to what I had to say. I would have gone to her work and made such a scene that she would have talked to me just to avoid embarrassment. Lowell smiled at the young couple. I know it's easy for me to say this in hindsight, but that doesn't mean it's not true. I see two young people here who love each other very much. I see two young people who have been given bad advice by friends who meant well. Lowell paused and looked at Sally over his glasses. He waited a few seconds to give them time to consider his words. I will not grant this divorce at this time. Both Julie and James must attend anger management classes. You will meet with these people for at least 6 weeks. You may attend the classes together or separately, but you must attend them. At the end of the classes, if you still want a divorce, I will grant it. That is my decision. Court is adjourned. All rise, Percy ordered as Judge Lowell stood to leave. He stepped out from behind the bench and stood between the two tables where the plaintiffs and defendants were seated. As I said, attorneys, if you or your clients believe that I have considered this case unfairly or without impartiality, file your appeal papers by the end of business tomorrow, Lowell ordered. I will see that they are given expedited consideration, and you will have another hearing in a week. I don't think that will be necessary, Your Honor, Sam Collins said. He pointed to Julie and James, who were hugging each other, clinging to each other as if to a lifeline. I think your approach was the best in this case, sir. Lowell smiled, first at Julie and James, then at Collins. Are you trying to butter me up, Mr. Collins? No, sir. I'm just stating a fact. Results matter, and today we got the right results, Collins replied. Lowell nodded and walked over to the young couple. They turned to the judge. A word of advice, Mr. and Mrs. Thomas, not from a judge, but from a man who has been married for almost 30 years and, I might add, happily. Remember one phrase. It's better to talk than to fight. Follow that, and you'll live as long as Mrs. Lowell and I. He turned and headed for his office. This time his steps were lighter, and a smile played on his face. He hung up his robe, sat down, and looked out the window. The smile was still on his face when Percy entered. The wisdom of Solomon, Judge, that's what you had today. Percy laughed. Yes, sir, the wisdom of Solomon. Lowell laughed at his bailiff. Not quite, Percy. I had a trump card up my sleeve. James Thomas Sr. told me what his son had said. I contacted Mr. and Mrs. Tanner and verified the boy's story before calling Julie and James. Now I owe Judge Gilbert one. He picked this case, and I convinced him to let me handle it. That doesn't matter. Not many judges would have cared enough to intervene. Percy paused and smiled again. Remember what you said the other day? That you want to change the world for the better. Well, you've certainly changed the lives of these two young men, and I don't think any other Supreme Court judge would have done what you did. Yes, sir, the wisdom of Solomon, no doubt. Good night, Judge. That evening, a very different Randall Lowell returned home. Instead of entering the house with his shoulders slumped, he stood up straight and walked with a determined gait. His eyes were bright and expressive, not a little sad and wary. For the past few days, Randall had been serious and pensive. Now he was smiling and sociable. "Woman in the house," Randall called out, laughing, and headed for the kitchen. "Your husband's home. Where's my drink?" He began telling Mary about his day before he reached the kitchen. When he walked through the door, he stopped and opened his mouth in surprise. Mary was standing in the middle of the room with his drink in her hands, but that wasn't what surprised him. She was wearing an apron tied around her neck and ending 10 inches above her knees. Except for the apron and high heels, she was wearing nothing else. It had been a long time since he had seen her dressed or undressed like that during the day. "Your drink, my lord," Mary said and laughed, looking at Randall's expression. "Dinner will be ready in a few minutes, sir." He took the drink offered to him, drank it, and placed the glass on the table. "Dinner can wait," Randall replied. Bending down, he lifted Mary, threw her over his shoulder like a fireman, and headed down the hallway toward the bedroom. Mary laughed and struggled. kicking her legs. "Put me down, you brute! Dinner will be ruined," she protested through her laughter. "Let it be," Randall replied. He playfully slapped his wife's bare bottom and continued on his way to the bedroom. Later that evening, much later, they sat at the kitchen table eating sandwiches and soup. Mary's meatloaf was burnt beyond recognition. Randall was dressed in loose shorts and a t-shirt. Mary was in a light robe and smiling. "It's been a long time since I felt like my husband was really here," she said with a smile. "It's nice to have him back." "It's nice to be back," Randall admitted, looking at the wall. "I think I've been in a bad mood for the last few weeks. But today, I had a case that somehow made up for all the jerks and crooks I usually deal with." Turning to his wife, he added, "Today I changed a young couple's life. I really did." "I know," Mary said. "Percy called and told me about Thomas's case and what you did." She stood up, walked over to Randall's chair, and sat down on his lap. "I'm so proud of you, dear. Like Percy said, you're a good judge." They hugged. Mary rested her head on Randall's shoulder and said, "But I don't know what to think about this Solomon wisdom story." Randall smiled. "The Thomas case is the main reason I'm in such a good mood, and everything else is my next case." Mary leaned back to look at Randall's face. "Don't keep me in suspense. What's the new case?" "The next case is a major lawsuit between a group of tenants and the absentee owner of a slum. It should be very interesting," Randall said with a smile. "I feel sorry for whoever ends up on the wrong side of that case," Mary replied. "It's being presided over by a harsh judge. May God help them."